Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, boy, and it is great to see the snow receding. You know, it seems like we're seeing a little more lawn, a little more of everything than we did.
My neighbor is so excited. Can you guess how excited he is?
How excited is he?
He's so excited he wet his plants. So yeah, I mean it is. I've been dying to use that one for a while, but I mean it's like I can just tell my mood over the last week. It's been nice. It's been bright. The snow's off my roof, which has been a concern. You know, the snow's clearing out of the walkways, which has been a concern. My alley is a total mess, but that's fine. I don't need to park back there.
Yeah,
right
and
now.
I gauge the snow melt by how much of my perennial flowers and shrubs are starting to appear.
Things
out
are
of the
starting.
snowpack.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and a lot of the we're seeing that the winter grasses have been kind of matted down a little bit. But I'm also seeing on some of my walks, I'm seeing some little pops of green starting to,
You know, I noticed that on the edge of some of the snowbanks, there's still a snowbank there, but where the lawn is starting to appear, there's little green shoots starting.
Yeah. Well, what did I see? Oh, it was my cousin out in Medora, but she was talking about how now there are crocuses are already out. And we're probably not that. We'll see what the weather does over the next week. But, here we are and just about to mid-April. And, we may not be far from that. We may start seeing
There's not much frost in the ground. So when the snow is gone and we get a little warm, things are going to pop.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about how the kind of weather is affected, how our long winter has affected kind of our gardening plans and things that we normally would do.
Right, because there's rarely a normal year.
Right.
I mean, it's up and down. But I mean, this is really not normal that we have snow middle of April, still this much snow. So this will affect probably what gardeners are going to do this year. Because I know in our own yard, this is going to affect what I'm doing.
Because as gardeners, we kind of have like a timeline. We have an idea for when we want to start doing things, and it's kind of arbitrary. We know that we have to wait and see what the weather does.
Yeah, you adjust, but for most years, you kind of do similar things about the same time with a little adjustment, like you said.
Yeah, and so one of the things let's talk about is, while the snow is receding, the snow is going away, we're seeing things in the yard. And some of the things that we're seeing are, while we are seeing some shoots of green, some of the other things are not as welcoming. What are we finding out there? What did you find in your yard?
Well, a few podcasts ago, I think I might have mentioned that when I was snow blowing alongside our driveway, and I snow blow about 6 inches into the lawn just, to make the driveway a little wider. And I mentioned that I had uncovered a couple of voles, the field mice with short little tails. And I had never experienced that before. And they're fat. And of course, voles, one of the main symptoms of what they do is they're living under the snowpack and they make all these little tunnels throughout the lawn. And we've had problems with voles in the past, not just me, but lots of homeowners, yard owners. And so they live under the snowpack and they feed on your lawn. And so anyway, when I revealed a couple of those, I thought, oh man, it could be a kind of a tough year for voles. So now as the snow is receding from our lawn, now I see more those tunnels. I see the result of what they were doing underneath. So in your lawn, for example, you see all these meandering tunnels where they've chewed away the grass. And so now, my lawn is quite typical. I live, not on the outermost fringes. There are other housing developments around me.
But you don't live downtown.
Right, yeah, I don't live downtown. But, in past years, these voles will even affect maybe some of the older areas. Yeah. Not maybe as much as the newer residential areas. But anyway, when the snow disappears, and if you see these meandering channels, that's vole damage. In most cases, if you rake up what they've destroyed, and they leave all this fluff, as they've eaten away the crown of the grass, they leave this dead fluff, and sometimes you'll even find the nest. So that needs to be raked off. And in most cases, the grass will come back with a good raking. If they've eaten it far enough down to bare dirt, then of course you do need to reseed. So anyway, this could be one of the worst vole years. We won't know until the snow totally disappears, but this is what I'm finding in our own yard.
And so obviously in yards where they get more direct sunlight, than trees or yards with a lot of trees, people will their lawn will be, or the snow will disappear sooner. This is always a question. How soon should people go out and rake? Because you can really do some damage if you go out too aggressively too early.
Yeah, because if too early, while the lawn is wet, you can actually physically rip out some of these little grass plants. And of course, that's not good. So anyway, I always chuckle because it's a very scientific, heavy-duty way to determine if your lawn's ready to rake. And that is just by kneeling on it. And if your jeans come up with a wet spot on the knee, then it's too wet to rake. If you come up dry, then you're okay.
And I think for a while it will be. We're still looking at it. It'll still be wet for a while.
So usually when people are raking lawns the last half of April, we might need to delay just a little bit.
And so one of the things when people get out in the lawn and start seeing things, a big thing in spring and a big question people have is snow mold. What are we looking at this year? How do you think that having so much moisture out there will affect the lawns in that way with snow mold?
This could be a year in which we see more snow mold because now the lawns got covered up with snow fairly early in December with that wet, heavy snow before the ground had much frost in it. So the ground was a little more warm, the grass under the snow a little warmer, and kind of that warm, moist, that's conditions in which molds can grow. And so we anticipate we might see more snow mold when the snow disappears. And now you know if you have snow mold, because when the snow disappears, you see this gray webbing. Sometimes it's a little pinkish. There's actually a pink snow mold. It's a fungus. And so if the snow disappears and you see that, it's fairly easy to remedy. When the lawn gets just a little drier, if you fluff it up with a leaf rake, the air itself will take care of the snow mold. So there's rarely need to put a chemical fungicide on. So just as soon as the top dries just a little and you can go across it with a leaf rake, that'll aerate it and it'll disappear. Now I should mention, there's a lot of seasonal allergies, molds and mildew and all that in the air. And of course, when you rake up your lawn with snow mold, those spores are going to be up in the air. So it's advised to wear a preventative type mask.
Yeah.
When you're doing that.
Yeah, some kind of just a face covering, just so that you're not breathing in all of that dust and all those particles.
Dust type mask will usually do it.
Yeah. So talking about the lawn, of course, now the snow is going away. We're all really excited to see green grass. And so you want to get out there and you want to treat your lawn. How is this going to affect? How's this late spring going to affect, what we normally do for going out and putting in fertilizer and things like that?
Well, fertilizer can actually wait, and the recommended time for fertilizer is actually around Memorial Day, after the lawn has greened up. They've done a lot of turf research on this to find the best time that the lawns can actually use up the fertilizer, and they found that instead of fertilizing earlier, just as it's starting to green up, that's almost like force feeding it before the lawn's ready to use it. So researchers have found that delaying your fertilizer until around Memorial Day, the last part of May, is when the grass is actively growing, and then those roots can actually take up the fertilizer. If you fertilize too early, you get a good rain, it can wash it down into the drains and out into our rivers and streams. So I don't think that this maybe later spring is going to affect that, because we shouldn't really be fertilizing anyway our lawns until the end of May. Point. So I think we're good there. But one thing it will have an effect on is when crabgrass preventative chemicals are applied to our lawns. Now, the hardware stores and national merchandisers and garden centers are already filled with crabgrass preventer. You see these bags of fertilizer with crabgrass preventer. And usually the timing of that is around April 15th. But of course, April 15th now, I think we're still going to have some snow on some lawns. Mm-hmm. So the key to watch is the soil temperature. When the soil temperature gets to about 50 degrees, that's when crabgrass will start to sprout. So crabgrass preventative materials, the granular type, need to be applied before the lawn soil gets to 50 degrees. Now you can check if you have a soil thermometer or other type thermometer, you can put that down in.
The same as like an instant read thermometer that you'd use on
if you get it down to kind of the 2-inch level.
Okay.
And of course they do sell a soil type thermometers, but an easy way, the way that I look is I do a Google search for NDAWN, that's NDAWN, NDAWN soil temperatures. And that brings up a whole chart for all around the region what these soil temperatures are doing. So I just monitor that, and when it starts getting to 50 degrees, then that's when the person would put on these crabgrass preventers. If you put it on too late, the crabgrass has already sprouted. And we could do a whole program on how do you know if these weedy grasses are crabgrass instead of quackgrass, but that's probably for another day. You can certainly look up if you're curious about that. Do I have crabgrass or is it quackgrass? Just do a Google search. Is it crabgrass or quackgrass? And add my name, Don Kinzler, Kinzler. It'll bring up a blog post that will show that.
And so, because we were talking about like when you should go out and rake your yard if the ground is still wet. If the ground is still wet, but it is above 50, the ground is getting close to that 50 degree mark, can you still go out and put in your crabgrass preventer?
Yes, that's a good point. Because these crabgrass preventers are dry granules, and in order to be activated, they need moisture. And so if the lawn is dry, it needs to be watered in or put it on before we're going to get a rain. But if there's some moisture already on the grass, that will help those granules turn into a liquid, because it does need to be liquefied to give that preventative coating that's going to prevent the crabgrass seed from germinating. So that's a good point. You do need moisture in order to get this crabgrass preventer to work.
All right, we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we got some more things to talk about as far as how this late spring is going to affect your yard.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
So, Don, we've talked before about, in spring, in quote-unquote normal spring, or maybe more what we're used to, one of the things you can go out and do even before maybe even the even before the ground totally warms up and before you're out in your garden is to prune your trees. That's actually something better to do early spring, right?
It is. The recommended time for pruning is late winter while things are still dormant. Well, most of the cold weather is likely past, but before things start to leaf out, before those buds start to swell. So the dormant time is time to prune. Well, I've been getting calls and questions because many people who would be pruning their apple trees within the last couple of weeks, there's just too much snow. They can't walk out to their apple trees. And of course, snow is getting down a little. But so people are wondering, is it still too late to do this pruning? And no, we're fine. If the trees are still dormant, go ahead, we can prune. Or even if they're starting to expand bud a little bit, it's probably better to do it now than to delay. There's one thing, though, with apple trees. There is also a school of thought that some diseases, one called a black rot fungus, is actually less likely to invade an apple tree if you wait until the leaves have actually started to grow. So apple trees, there is some justification for kind of waiting until actually they start growth. But for other trees and shrubs, if we can prune them before they've started much growth.
How about things like my dogwoods, things like that? Or is it now a good time to go back and cut them down?
As soon as the snow goes down enough where you can see kind of what you're pruning, then now would be a good time. And I think things might start to leaf out fairly soon. So we might not have a whole lot of window of pruning opportunity this year. So that's one way this year is different. Talking about pruning, one way that this year is different, usually we have a wider opportunity of pruning. This year, just everything has been so full of snow. So one way this year is different is we have a shorter window of opportunity for some of these things.
Well, and I think that a lot of people probably wouldn't. That's when a lot of the front end work is done. But if that means that our usual growing season is more in line with what we're used to, then I think maybe then we could probably be okay with that. I think a lot of people that's their big concern is that we still want to have a full growing season. Yeah,
exactly. And that also brings up the point about trees and shrubs leafing out. With this much snow and the snow staying this long, Are trees and shrubs going to be delayed in leafing out? But it's interesting. We've mentioned how there isn't that much frost in the ground, and kind of as we're speaking, the frost is probably out of the ground already because there wasn't much to begin with. And so what causes trees and shrubs to leaf out? What's their trigger point? Well, when the roots are thawed out and, in unfrozen soil, those roots can start taking up water. And when the above ground temperature starts moderating, those trees, and the day lengths are long now, so this is signaling the trees to kick in some growth. So they're kind of oblivious to still having some snow on the ground. So it's interesting. This may be one of the few years where we could see trees and shrubs starting to leaf out, and there's still some snow on the ground. Because I know in our yard, as we're talking today, and what's the date today, John?
We're
the talking
12th?
The 12th, yeah. So on the 12th, I still in our yard have a fair amount of snow in many areas. So it's going to be interesting if we still have a fair amount of snowpack with trees and shrubs leafing out. Because with soil warming up, the air temperature warming up, I think things are going to start leafing out fairly soon.
So with one of my trees, a maple tree, I've got chlorosis, an issue. And in the past, in the spring, I'll go around and I'll drill some holes and I'll pour in chelated iron, a liquefied chelated iron.
Sure.
Is that something now that I should keep an eye on as far as the buds on the trees? Because you want to get that before the buds go. And like you said, if the frost in the ground is gone and the roots are coming alive, there's still snow on the ground. Do I do it? Do I do it then?
Yeah,
or
as soon as the snow disappears to where you'll be able to get that product, the iron product, which is available at garden centers.
Yep.
And as soon as you can get that down, I would certainly go ahead and do it.
What about rose bushes? How do you think that this will be? What are we looking at for rose
Now,
bushes?
I've been kind of excited because with as deep as the snow is and came early, piled up early, so I thought this is going to be a really good year for our rose bushes because they have such much nice natural insulation. So as the snow has been going down gradually and exposing the rose canes, I've been watching them to see how much dieback. Now, one thing that's neat about rose bushes, they tell you immediately what has wintered well, what part of the branches have wintered well and what has died back. Because everything that has winter killed is black. Black or brownish. And what has survived winter well are nice green. So there's a sharp demarcation line. So then the spring pruning is always to cut it down to the level in which you're removing the blackened canes and leaving the green part below. And so some winters when we don't have much snow and it's really, really cold, no insulation, sometimes they can freeze down to just within a couple inches above ground level that's just that green yet, the green canes. And it's that type of thing when you're looking at it, you say, oh, sure, I know, I see what Don meant. Yeah, black above, green cane below that point. And what I'm seeing here is they wintered much better.
Okay.
I still have some dieback on maybe half the canes are blackish above, but they wintered much better than they did in the past. So I'm happy about that. One advantage of the snowy winter
is that it provides that kind of comforting blanket.
It gives that good insulation. Snow, and I don't remember what the R value of snow is, but it's substantial.
Yeah, I know. You never really. That's an odd thing to think of as snow as an insulator. But.
Yeah, and it is one of nature's best insulators. When trees and shrubs die back, when trees, shrubs, roses, or perennial flowers die back most severely, it's in what's called an open winter, when we just don't have snow and we get cold weather and it penetrates deeply, and there isn't that blanket of insulation. So I'm looking at the bright side of all that snow.
Yeah, well, that's one good way to look at it. Well, we're going to take another little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about cleaning up the garden spaces and things that we can do to get gardens ready to grow again.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, kind of one of those necessary chores to do in the spring, which is spring cleanup in the house, but also out in the garden. And again, later, longer spring, not quite ready to get out and do it yet, or are we?
Well, one of the things that has differed this year than other years is usually in April, early April, the snow disappears and all of a sudden our perennial flower bed reappears.
Yeah.
And that's the time, of course, to remove the old spent above ground portions, that's dead over winter. So you go ahead and cut it back to a few inches above ground level. And this year, we don't have that wide window of opportunity that we usually do. Because, for example, now on April 12th, my perennial flowers have the old dead tops are just starting to appear. There's way too much snow, so I can't even see where the base is yet to cut back. And with the warmth coming, the soil's relatively warm, the air temperature's getting warm, these perennial flowers are going to start growing fairly soon. And if you wait too long to remove the old dead portions, the new growth starts coming from the bottom and it intermingles with the old dead stuff and it's harder to cut back. Whereas if you get the old portions cut back before much new growth, you can just take a hedge clip or a pruner and just cut off the top. So anyway, I'm anticipating that when our perennial flower beds do officially appear from under the snow, we're not going to have much of a window of opportunity to cut back that old dead portion. We're going to have to get on it fairly soon because that new growth is going to start pushing.
I know some of my hostas I didn't get out on one side of the house. I didn't get out. And hostas can be kind of an icky mess because they're big and leafy and they're wonderful. But if you don't get out and clean them up.
And when they appear in the spring, it's kind of just all
mushy.
a mushy mess.
Yeah. So it's a kind of a pain in the butt to clean up. But
Have they appeared yet where you've got them? Has the snow disappeared?
Some of them.
Yet?
Some of them I'm starting to see the tops of where they were. But still, like you said, I can't get down to the base of the plant. So I don't know how far down
So
to
this
cut
year,
back.
probably when the perennials do appear in patches, we probably have to get on it and cut off those old dead tops. Typically you just wait until the whole thing appears from out under the snow and tackle it. Now I'm thinking in my own, I'm going to have to, as they appear, I'm going to have to get on it
to really be
right
present and
because
aware.
I just have a feeling that the growth is going to start popping.
So now, are you already walking out in your yard, even with the snowbanks?
So far, all that I can see is just some parts of grass. I'm not seeing any perennial flowers except right along the house. I am seeing along the house where the snow wasn't quite as deep, I'm seeing bare patches of like daylilies.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking they're going to start pushing pretty soon. And so I'm going to have to do some pruning on those, cutting back on those, while there's still a whole bunch of snow on the rest of it. So again, this year's different.
Let's talk about some of the spring things that come up. Tulips. When are you expecting tulips to start coming up?
Well, the spot that I've got the tulips is out away from the house, still under snow.
Okay.
So I can't even see those, but I know people who have them like on the south side of houses. They're up already. I've seen Facebook photos of tulips coming up. And so that'll be good. But again, I just think it's so odd that there's deep snow in parts of the yard and other parts are starting growth. And so I haven't seen this, I don't think,
one of the
for
ones
a long time
that we've got that's always a good spring. It's one of the first signs of life in our yard is, and I always think it's not a begonia. Is it a begonia? Or
Bergenia, maybe?
Bergenia, yeah.
Bergenia.
And that's a good
wonderful perennial.
full leafy,
Blooms in May, usually.
Yeah, and so usually that's the first one that we see because that's in an area where the snow doesn't really tend to stay too long, never piles up too big. It's actually kind of under one of our dogwoods.
Kind of appearing. They're an interesting perennial. They almost stay a little semi-evergreen under
all
the
year.
snow.
Yeah, so I really love them for that. And so I haven't seen it yet. That there's still just enough snow just covering that. But pretty soon, I'm thinking that, we're looking at within the next 10 days, we're going to have a series of days that'll be in the 50 degrees. And so things like that will really start. There's so much has started to emerge already. The snowpack has gone down so much. But things like that will start popping out.
And what I'm really curious about is, since the ground is not frozen under there, I'm curious, when the snow disappears, are some of the perennials going to have started some growth underneath there?
What are the ones?
I'm curious.
Which ones do you think will have, or which ones could?
Well, for example, daylilies that start growth relatively soon. Iris start popping up. You know, I might be tempted after this podcast to take a shovel and dig away some of the snow and see what's happening under there to some of our perennials. Because I have a feeling that they're just itching to go. Maybe some of them have started a little growth under which isn't the best. It's not the best if they start a little growth under that snow, because they'll be starved for light.
So we've talked about the garden, the perennials in the garden, but let's talk about garden vegetables. What are we looking at for planting? And again, we have to wait until the snow's gone. But if you've already gotten started in your basement or started in with a grow room, what are we looking at for getting vegetables into the ground and getting vegetables ready to get into the ground?
It's always a concern is, are we going to get a late season, a late start? And of course, with the snow gradually melting and getting into the soil, it feels like things are going to be too wet to work up our vegetable gardens real early. Because now some vegetables can be planted early in April, things that can tolerate frost, things like peas and spinach and lettuce and kale, radishes can all be planted early. And so the question is going to be, is our lawn or raised garden, is it even going to be dry enough yet to get anything in April? So we'll just have to wait and see. But one interesting thing is, and this kind of crosses the decades. And I've experienced this. Many old timers say, it seems like the garden is going to be late, but some of our best gardens have been when we planted them the end of May or the first part of June. And that's true. Sometimes the soil's warm, things sprout right away. So even though it feels like we might be getting a little late, it can be a wonderful growing season, one of the best vegetable gardens we've ever had, but we might not be able to get some of those really early vegetables in. So much will depend on if the soil gets dry enough in order to work and plant. And if the temperatures stay nice, not too cool.
All right. So, Don, this weekend coming up, you've got Garden Palooza. And that event is, by the time people hear this, the event will already have passed. But I'm curious to hear what people are saying, because we've just recently had this warm up. Things are starting to look we're finally starting to look like spring. It'll be fun to talk gardening with people.
It's going to be fun to be talking gardening with people and see kind of what's on everybody's mind, whether people are concerned, or to see in their yards what's happening and what's doing. So this is going to be an interesting, and we say no two growing seasons are the same, but there's kind of somewhat of a normal. And I don't recall a year that's been kind of like this in a fair number of decades of gardening. This is kind of unique, I think.
And because of that, I think people will have questions for you. And what's the best way to reach you if they have questions?
Best way to reach me is to email donald.kinzler, Kinzler, donald.kinzler@ndsu.edu. And feel free to send photos. If there's issues that you can photograph, send me a photo.
If they're finding voles in their yard, or if they're finding they can send good photos too. If things are already starting to come up, that'd be fun.
I love it. And, sometimes in the garden column, I will feature some inspirational type photos. So that we aren't always talking about things going wrong, but sometimes it's fun to talk about things that go right.
Yeah, and I think with this show, we've talked a lot about how things are changing or going to be a little bit different. But ultimately, we're really excited about this year for gardening, aren't we?
Yes, because it's interesting. If you ever listen or read anything I write, I never refer to our growing season as harsh or severe or challenging. Because like I mentioned before, if you read things from Georgia, I've read, they talk about a challenging gardening climate. Challenging, Georgia? But, they talk about mold and mildew and too wet and alligators in your garden and things like that. So anyway, we live in a great gardening area. And I love it. I have more plants and flowers and gardening vegetables than, that I could hope for. So anyway, I never refer to us as being challenging. We're in the North Dakota, Minnesota. We're in the geographic center of North America. So there's a whole lot of the continent way above us. We're not the last outpost on the way to the North Pole.
That's right.
So we're in a good gardening area. I love it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week to talk about more gardening. And this has been Gardening Together. I'm John Lamb.
Don Kinzler.
And we'll talk to you later.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.